Hi, this is Ellen from the Chili Dog, and today I'm going to show you how to do the Kitchener stitch. The Kitchener stitch is used to graft or join two active rows of stitches together, and it's commonly used to finish socks and mittens and can also be used to join sweater shoulders. It works well because the join will blend in unnoticeably with stockinette stitches. So right now I'm finishing up an Azalea sock. I'm done knitting, and now I need to join my stitches that are here across the toe. So let's get started. When doing the Kitchener stitch, your work should be divided across 2 knitting needles, and position the stitches so that the last stitch that you worked is on the right hand side of this back knitting needle. And you want to make sure that you have the same number of stitches on both the front and back needle. If you look really closely at my sock, you may notice that I have 1 extra stitch on this back needle. And this is because of the method I use to turn my toe. And these last 2 stitches over here are going to be worked together as if they were a single stitch. So the first thing you need to do is to trim your yarn off the ball or the skein. And you want to trim your yarn so that it's 9 to 10 times longer than what you're grafting together. So for my case here, my sock is 4 inches wide. So I trimmed the yarn tail so that it's 40 inches long. And it's better if the tail is a little too long than too short. If it's too short, you may not be able to get all the stitches joined together. And there's nothing you can really do at that point to fix it. If your yarn tail is too long, the excess can just be trimmed off after you complete the join and weave in the tail. So it's no big deal. So the first thing you need to do is thread your yarn tail onto a yarn needle. And then you can start stitching. As you're grafting, it's really easy for this yarn tail to get tangled up. So you want to make sure that your yarn tail always stays under your 2 knitting needles. If for some reason the tail starts to twist over or around any of the needles, take a moment to fix it and make sure the tail is properly positioned underneath the 2 needles. Just like when we knit, the join is going to be worked from right to left, starting with 2 setup stitches. So bring your yarn needle through the first stitch on the front needle, and you want to do that purlwise. And then pull the yarn through. Again, make sure that it's not getting twisted up around your needles. The tail should stay underneath the 2 knitting needles. And then you want to bring the yarn needle through the first stitch on the back needle knitwise. And then pull the yarn all the way through. So now we'll begin dropping stitches off our knitting needles as we work across. On the front needle, you always bring the yarn through the first stitch on the needle knitwise, and then through the second stitch purlwise. On the back needle, you're always going to bring your yarn through the first stitch purlwise, and then through the second stitch knitwise. So let me show you how that works. So we're going to scoot our stitches down. We're going to bring our needle through the first stitch knitwise and drop the stitch off the needle, and then through the next stitch purlwise and leave it on your knitting needle, and then pull the yarn all the way through, making sure that tail stays underneath your 2 knitting needles. And then we'll bring it through the first stitch on the back needle purlwise and drop it off the knitting needle, and through the second stitch knitwise and leave it on the knitting needle and pull the yarn through. And again, make sure it doesn't get twisted. And one thing that's important here is you don't want to pull your stitches too tightly as you graft. They can easily be tightened up when the graft is all the way complete, and I'll show you how to do that later. So let me show you one more time how it works. We'll bring it through the first stitch knitwise and drop it off the needle, through the second stitch purlwise and leave it on the needle and pull the yarn through. Then on the back needle through the first stitch purlwise and drop it off the needle, through the second stitch knitwise, leaving it on the needle and pull the yarn through. And again, make sure that your yarn doesn't get twisted up around stuff. It's really easy, especially at the beginning, for it to get tangled because it's so long. And one more time, knitwise through the first stitch, drop it off, purlwise through the second, leaving it on, pull the yarn through. On the back needle, purlwise through the first stitch, drop it off, knitwise through the second stitch, leaving it on, and pull the yarn through. So you're going to continue in this manner all the way across until there's one stitch left on both the front and back needles, and make sure not to pull your yarn too tightly as you work. I've worked across all my stitches, and remember that because of the way I turned my toe, it looks like I really have one stitch on the front needle and two on the back. But for me, those two loops at the back are worked together as if they were a single stitch. So to finish up, I am going to continue in the same pattern by bringing the yarn needle through the last stitch on the front needle knitwise, and I'm going to drop it off. And then I'm going to bring it through the last stitch on the back needle purlwise. It's a little tight there. Bring it through purlwise and drop it off, and then pull the yarn all the way through. You can see that right now the stitches across my join look really loose and sloppy. So to tighten everything up with a knitting needle or with your yarn needle, you're going to start at the right hand side of the sock and gradually lift one leg of a stitch at a time across the join to tighten everything up. And you want to make sure that the stitches across your join eventually are the same size as the stitches in your work. And this is a little bit tedious to do, not gonna lie, but it's worth it to make a really nice, neat join in the end. And you can see those stitches just tightening right up. And again, we'll look up close here, and you can see that now the stitches in my join are about the same size as the stitches in my knitting. So you do that all the way from right to left across until all your stitches are tightened up. After tightening everything up, the join blends in unnoticeably into your knitting. However, I still have this loop of yarn at the end of my work. So to make that disappear, all you have to do is just pull on the yarn tail, and it just tightens up that loop, and the join is complete. So to finish everything off, put your yarn tail back onto your yarn needle, pull the yarn tail into the wrong side of your work, weave in the end, and then trim off the tail. I hope you enjoyed learning how to do the Kitchener stitch to graft active stitches together. If so, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, The Chili Dog, on YouTube. Until next time, happy knitting!